How a crow can solve problems better than your 7-year-old. There is a video that circulated among cognitive scientists in 2009 that made a lot of people in very serious laboratories go very quiet. In the video, a crow is placed in front of a transparent tube. At the bottom of the tube, there is a small piece of food, too deep to reach with a beak. Next to the tube, there are several objects: a short stick, a long stick, a piece of wire, and a small stone. The crow looks at the tube, looks at the objects, picks up the long stick, retrieves the food. That part is impressive, but it is not what made the scientists go quiet. What made them go quiet is what happened when the researchers replaced the long stick with a short one, too short to reach the food. The crow picked it up, tested it against the tube, set it down, looked around, found a second short stick, picked up both sticks, and inserted one into the hollow end of the other, creating a single stick long enough to reach the food. It had never done this before. It had never been shown how. It looked at a problem, understood what was missing, and built the solution from available parts. A 7-year-old presented with the same problem will typically try to reach with their hand, then ask for help. Before this video is over, you're going to understand not just what crows can do, but why they can do it. And the answer to that question is going to make you look at intelligence itself. Human intelligence. Your intelligence. In a way you probably weren't expecting when you clicked on this. Stay with me. The wrong question. For most of the 20th century, scientists studying animal intelligence were asking the wrong question. The question they were asking was, can this animal do what humans do? Can it use language? Can it recognize itself in a mirror? Can it use tools? Can it plan? The problem with that question is that it treats human cognition as the standard against which all other minds are measured. And when you do that, you build experiments designed to find human-like behavior in animals, which means you spend a lot of time not finding it and concluding incorrectly that the animals don't have it. The shift happened slowly, and it happened in large part because of crows. Because crows kept doing things that didn't fit the model. They kept solving problems they shouldn't have been able to solve. They kept demonstrating abilities that the human-centric framework said were impossible for a bird brain. And eventually, enough of those impossible things accumulated that scientists had to stop and ask a different question. Not, can crows do what humans do? But, what is intelligence actually, and how many different forms can it take? That question opened something, and what came through the opening was stranger and more interesting than anyone expected. What a 7-year-old can do. Let's be precise about what we mean when we say a 7-year-old is intelligent, because the comparison in the title of this video is not a throwaway provocation. It's a specific claim grounded in developmental psychology, and understanding it requires understanding what cognitive scientists actually measure when they measure a child's intelligence. At 7 years old, a typically developing human child can do the following things. They can plan ahead, hold a goal in mind, and execute a sequence of steps to reach it. They can understand cause and effect. Not just, this happened then that happened, but this caused that. They can use tools and understand that a tool is an instrument for a purpose, not just an object. They can solve novel problems, problems they have never encountered before, by applying principles they have previously learned. They can deceive. They understand that other people have minds, that those minds can hold false beliefs, and that those false beliefs can be deliberately created. And they can learn from watching others, observing a solution and applying it to their own situation. These 6 capacities form the core of what developmental psychologists call concrete operational intelligence. And for decades, this cluster of abilities was considered a threshold, a marker of a mind sophisticated enough to engage with the world as a system of causes, effects, and manipulable objects rather than just a stream of stimuli to react to. Crows have every single one of them, not approximately, not in a weakened or simplified form. Fully and documentably in controlled experimental conditions across dozens of studies at multiple institutions on multiple continents. Let's go through them, one by one, because each one tells a different part of the story. Planning the stick and tube experiment I described at the opening of this video is a planning test. To combine two short sticks into one long one, the crow had to do something specific. It had to hold the end goal, food at the bottom of the tube, in mind while executing an intermediate step that didn't itself produce food. It had to delay the goal, work towards something that was not the goal in service of the goal. This is called means-end reasoning, and it is harder than it sounds. Most animals, when faced with a problem, are locked into the immediate moment. They try the thing that seems like it should work. If it doesn't work, they try again. Or they give up. They cannot step back, assess the gap between where they are and where they need to be, and construct an intermediate action that bridges that gap. Crows can. In a landmark study at Auckland University, New Zealand crows, a species called the New Caledonian crow, regarded as the most cognitively advanced corvid, were presented with a problem requiring 8 sequential steps to solve. Each step produced a tool needed for the next step. The food was only accessible after step 8. The crows solved it, not on the first try, not without some exploration, but they solved it. They held a chain of 8 causally linked steps in working memory and executed them in sequence. The same study tested children. The average age at which children could reliably solve the 8-step version was, you already know where this is going, around 7 years old. Cause and effect. Understanding causality is not the same as noticing patterns. A dog that learns that the sound of a leash means a walk is noticing a pattern. It has associated one stimulus with another. It does not understand why. It cannot generalize that principle to a new situation. Understanding causality means grasping the mechanism. Not just A is followed by B, but A produces B, and therefore anything that has the relevant property of A will also produce B. Researchers tested this in crows using what they called the trap tube problem. A horizontal tube with food inside, and a trap, a hole in the bottom of the tube, positioned between the food and one end. If the crow pushed the food toward the trap, it fell through and was lost. The crow had to push the food away from the trap, toward the safe end. Simple enough. Crows learned to do it quickly. But then the researchers rotated the tube so the trap was on top, facing up. Now the trap was physically incapable of catching the food because gravity would not take the food upward through the hole. A crow that truly understood the mechanism, that the trap works by catching falling objects, should recognize that the upward trap is not a threat and push the food freely in either direction. That's exactly what happened. The crows adjusted their behavior based on the physical logic of the situation, not just a learned rule. They understood why the trap was dangerous, and they understood when it wasn't. This kind of causal reasoning, flexible, principle-based, generalized, is what allows intelligence to operate in novel situations. It is the difference between a mind that has learned a library of responses and a mind that understands how the world works. Tool use and tool manufacture. We need to talk about Betty again, because Betty's case is still, more than 20 years later, one of the most referenced examples of spontaneous tool manufacture in a non-human animal.
Betty was a New Caledonian crow housed at Oxford University. In 2002, she and a crow named Abel were given a task: retrieve a small bucket of food from a vertical tube. They were provided with two pieces of wire, one straight, one with a hook at the end. The hooked wire was the obvious tool for the task.
Abel grabbed it immediately, which is what crows do. They compete over resources. He flew off with it. Betty was left with the straight wire. What happened next was not anticipated by the researchers. Betty picked up the straight wire, looked at the tube, wedged one end of the wire under a rubber mat at the bottom of the enclosure, bent the wire against the edge of the mat until it formed a hook, and retrieved the food. The researchers, understandably, needed a moment.
They ran the experiment again and again. Over 10 trials, Betty manufactured hooks from straight wire 9 times. Each time Abel took the pre-made hook, she made her own. She was not repeating a trained behavior. She was solving a problem she had never encountered before: the absence of the right tool, by modifying available material to create the tool she needed. In the literature on tool manufacture, this level of flexible, on-demand fabrication is extraordinarily rare. It had been documented in great apes, in a handful of other species under very limited conditions. It had never been documented in a bird. And Betty did it because Abel stole her hook. She improvised under pressure. That is not instinct. That is engineering. Deception. Here is the one that tends to make people uncomfortable. Crows lie, not in a metaphorical sense. Not in the sense of camouflage or mimicry, which are biological deceptions that operate at the level of physical appearance rather than mind. Crows engage in deliberate, strategic, socially targeted deception. They intend to create false beliefs in the minds of other individuals. And they know when it's working. Here is how it works in practice. Crows cache food. They hide it for later. This is common among corvids and not in itself remarkable. What is remarkable is what crows do when they are being watched while caching. If a crow discovers it is being observed by another crow while hiding food, it will engage in what researchers call false caching. It will go through the full physical behavior of burying food, digging a small hole, appearing to deposit something, covering it, without actually depositing anything. The real food stays in its beak, or is quietly moved to another location when the observer is not looking. But here is the part that takes this from interesting to genuinely unsettling. The crows that engage in false caching most elaborately are the ones that have previously stolen food from other crows' caches. They know, from personal experience as a thief, that other crows are capable of theft, and they adjust their hiding behavior accordingly. Crows that have never stolen food are significantly less likely to bother with false caches. They haven't learned from their own behavior that the threat exists. What this means is that the crow is not just deceiving, it is modeling the mind of the observer. It is asking, in whatever way a crow asks things, what does that crow know? What does it want? What will it do with that information? And it is constructing a behavior designed to produce a specific false belief in a specific mind. That cognitive operation, taking the perspective of another individual, modeling their beliefs and acting to manipulate those beliefs, is called theory of mind. And it was, for a very long time, considered one of the defining characteristics of human intelligence. A crow figures this out, apparently, from the experience of being a thief. Learning from observation. The last capacity, and in some ways, the most consequential. Crows learn from watching. This is true of many animals to some degree. But in crows, observational learning operates at a level of sophistication that researchers are still working to fully understand. Crows don't just copy actions,
They extract principles from what they observe and apply those principles in new contexts. In one experiment, a crow watched a human demonstrator interact with a series of objects, some of which triggered a reward mechanism, some of which didn't. The crow was then given access to the objects. It avoided the unrewarding ones, selected the rewarding ones. On the first attempt, it had not just memorized which objects the human chose, it had identified what those objects had in common, formed a category, and applied that category independently. This is called abstract rule learning from observation. And in developmental psychology, the ability to do this, to watch, abstract a principle, and generalize, is considered a major cognitive milestone. It typically emerges in children around the age of, and I think you know where I'm going, 5 to 7 years old. But perhaps the most striking demonstration of crow observational learning does not come from a laboratory. It comes from a city. Crows in urban Japan have been observed doing something so specific, so purposeful, and so improbable that when it was first reported, ornithologists didn't believe it. They were using traffic. Crows in Sendai City had learned to crack open hard-shelled nuts, walnuts, specifically by placing them in the road at crosswalks. They would wait for a car to drive over the nut, cracking it, then wait for the traffic light to change to red, then walk into the crosswalk and retrieve the cracked nut safely while traffic was stopped. They were using the crosswalk for pedestrian safety, while retrieving food they had deliberately placed in traffic. When researchers documented this behavior more systematically, they found something even more striking. Young crows in the area were learning to do it by watching older crows. The behavior was spreading, not through genetics, not through instinct, through observation and transmission. That is cultural learning, the same mechanism through which human children learn language, social norms, practical skills, everything that makes us who we are rather than just what we are biologically. Crows have it, the brain. Again, I want to come back to the brain. Because now that you know what crows can do, the neuroscience lands differently. The pallium, the crow's non-neocortex that does everything the neocortex does, is not just structurally different from the human brain. It is architecturally efficient in a way the human brain is not. The crow achieves comparable cognitive output with dramatically fewer neurons, packed more densely, organized more compactly. In terms of neurons per unit of cognitive function, the crow brain may actually be more efficient than the human brain. What this means is that intelligence, real, flexible, problem-solving, future-projecting, socially sophisticated intelligence, is not a single thing that evolution found once and handed to primates. It is a solution to a problem. And evolution can find solutions more than once. The crow's brain is not a lesser version of your brain. It is a different answer to the same question, a question that the universe apparently keeps asking. How do you build a mind capable of navigating a complex, unpredictable, socially demanding world? Mammals found one answer. Crows found another. And the two answers, separated by 300 million years of divergent evolution, arrived at something remarkably, disturbingly similar. What this means? The comparison to a 7-year-old is not meant to diminish children. It is meant to do something specific, to locate crow intelligence on a map you already understand, to give you a reference point. Because the truth is that the comparison is both accurate and insufficient. In the specific cognitive domains we've discussed, sequential planning, causal reasoning, tool manufacture, theory of mind, observational learning, crows perform at a level consistent with a 7-year-old human child. That is what the research shows. That is what the experiments demonstrate. But a crow is not a 7-year-old in a bird's body. It is something else entirely. It is a mind that arrived at similar capacities through a completely different evolutionary history, living inside a completely different kind of body, navigating a completely different kind of life. A 7-year-old is still learning, still developing, still accumulating the cognitive tools that will eventually make them an adult human. The most cognitively complex organism on Earth. The crow is already what it is going to be. Fully formed, operating at its peak, solving the problems of its world with the precise set of mental tools it needs to survive, compete, and thrive. And its world increasingly includes us, our cities, our roads, our traffic lights and crosswalks and carelessly unattended food. The crow has been watching how we build things, how we move, how we leave opportunities. It is learning from us. The question, the one I'll leave you with, is whether we have been paying the same attention. The crow outside your window is not decorating the landscape. It is watching, processing, filing away what it sees. You just don't know yet what it's going to do with the information.